Vanquish is a third-person cover shooter developed by Platinum and published by Sega in 2010, which was recently re-released on PC in what looks like a series of PC ports of previous generation Platinum games, Bayonetta having been ported recently as well. The PC version supports 60 frames per second, mouse aiming, and high-def resolutions, so it's safe to say that it's the definitive release. There's really not too much to the plot, but it's a Platinum game, so gameplay is king here. You can expect some twists and turns and a typical action movie plot, but it's nothing too interesting. The game takes place in a techno-future where the Russians have hijacked an American orbital space colony and nuked San Francisco. As DARPA agent Sam Gideon, you're sent in with an experimental combat suit to help the Marines retake the colony. That combat suit is the central focus of the game's mechanics, being more than just an excuse for why Sam can take so many bullets to the chest. It has thrusters built into its legs which allow the player to boost around on the floor at high speeds, the mechanic the game was sold on. Where other cover shooters have you sitting behind the same wall for long periods of time, Vanquish gives you the tools and actively encourages you to slide around the battlefield and stay mobile. On top of this, the suit has built-in bullet time. Aiming down sights while boosting or rolling will activate slow-mo so that you can aim for enemy weaknesses, shoot down incoming missiles, and so on. However, if the player depletes their boost gauge, they'll have to wait a while for it to recharge and suffer a 30% movement speed penalty for the duration. Similarly, if the player is close to death, the suit will automatically trigger bullet time until the gauge is fully depleted. I'll admit straight away that I'm not much for cover shooters. I've always found them dull and samey, but Vanquish's boost and slow mechanics give it enough of a twist that I have a lot of fun with it. It's Platinum's classic charm, giving the player the ability to get really flashy and show off in a way that's actually fully practical. The more crazy the things you're doing look, the more likely it is you're getting something done, and that's a great system. For example, a low-skill player will likely use the boost solely for getting between cover, but a high-skill player can slide through danger and get a better vantage point for taking out armored enemies, mounted turrets, and so on. There are a few tricky techniques as well, one of my favorites involving frag grenades. Frag grenades have a long detonation time. Very often you'll find that enemies can get away from them before the grenade detonates. However, by throwing the grenade and immediately rolling or boosting into bullet time, the player can shoot the grenade out of midair and right in front of a crowd of enemies for massive damage. It's not only flashy but practical, as it saves a significant amount of ammo that you would otherwise be pumping into enemies. In theory, this could be done with a single bullet if your aim is good enough. Some larger enemies can be taken out this way using just 2 frag grenades, or 1 frag grenade and a melee attack. It's a great system that accommodates players of all types while rewarding those who put the effort in. You're punished for wasting boost or taking too much damage, but not in a way that means instant death or that is even 100% negative. Nearly dying and having your meter depleted sounds bad, but it also gives the player time to find cover and return fire. The player is being punished by being forced to move slow for a while in a game where the primary mechanic is about going fast, which I think is an ingenious way of incenting aggressive but calculated play. Melee attacks embody this design philosophy perfectly. Melee will one-shot small enemies and do about half health to larger ones, but a single melee attack will fully drain your boost meter. If you run into a crowd of enemies and melee attack one of them recklessly, you'll be out of meter and likely shot to pieces. Whereas in Gears of War, the player is given an instant kill melee chainsaw attack with little downside, Vanquish asks the player to put careful thought into every single melee strike. Not to mention, boosting into a melee attack on a giant robot followed by a slow-mo backflip to finish it off with bullets is pretty radical. One point of criticism Vanquish gets is its short length. Not counting cutscenes, a playthrough will only last about 4 hours. Even for a 7th generation linear cover shooter, that's pretty short, especially considering the game doesn't have multiplayer like Gears of War. I believe, however, that this short length is more a strength than it is a weakness. A big flaw of some of Platinum's other games, namely Bayonetta, is that they run on for too long. Bayonetta runs out of new enemy types and bosses about 2/3 of the way through, at which point it starts recycling them like crazy to pad for time. Vanquish doesn't have this problem. It's short, yes, but it's exactly as long as it should be in order to not overstay its welcome. Never did I see an enemy and go, oh, it's that thing again. Some things are reused, like the Argus core boss, but not excessively and not without new twists each time. And the game puts up a sturdy challenge all throughout. The game also never slows down. The game is designed in such a way that you're never given an obvious point where you're meant to put the controller down and take a break. The reason so many people play through it all in one go and are shocked at how short it is because it moves at a lightning pace. Each mission flows into the next and the threat never dies down, which really adds to the action movie feel of the game. On top of this is the classic Platinum trick. The game is designed to be played over and over again on harder and harder difficulties until you perfect it. There's a ranking system that judges you periodically during each mission, and beating the game unlocks a super hard mode. It's tailor-made for speedruns, keeping track of exactly how fast you finish each part of the game and how well you did it. So the short duration of a single playthrough perfectly complements back-to-back marathons as you improve at the game. If you plan to beat normal, hard, and god hard, you're looking at a 12-hour total. That said, if you're not the type of person who sees themselves playing a game more than once, be warned that you'll be missing out on a lot of what the game is designed for. The game has a whole host of weapons, each of which has its own situational uses and quirks. The assault rifle is exactly what it sounds like, pretty useful in most situations. The anti-armor pistol can penetrate shield, so it can take out enemies on mounted turrets in a single shot. The rocket launcher is a rocket launcher. Then you've got your assortment of weird weapons, like the disc launcher and the laser cannon, which are fun, but not the most practical thing in the world. Though I'm certain there are plenty of people who will do disc launcher only runs or what have you. The weapon pool isn't enormous, but there's enough variety that it's all fun to play around with. The fun of the boost mechanic sort of lowers the emphasis on what guns you're carrying, so no matter what you're holding, you can still pull some fancy tricks. The shooting itself is serviceable. There's nothing particularly amazing or terrible about the raw act of pointing your guns and shooting, regardless of what weapon you use, so it's all held up by other mechanics. Each weapon also has its own attached melee attack, though that's a small detail. I don't have too much to say about the weapons themselves, but there is an upgrade system, and it's probably the most controversial mechanic in the game. Enemies will sometimes drop upgrade parts that'll beef up whatever weapon you're holding when you pick them up. Each weapon has its own linear progression of upgrades. For example, the assault rifle gets ammo capacity upgrades and sometimes damage boosts. Picking up a copy of a gun you're holding while that gun is full on ammo will also give you part of an upgrade. If you drop a weapon you've upgraded, picking up any copy of that weapon in the future will maintain all your upgrades. However, upgrades are not permanent. Each time you die, except under certain conditions, you'll lose one segment of an upgrade level from all your equipped weapons. It, again, emphasizes player skill and rewards those with it, but unlike other mechanics, there's no positive to this. Die in one particular fight repeatedly and it'll only get harder and harder, theoretically until you're back down to base weapons. On paper, this seems like a really huge issue, but the game is generous enough with upgrade parts and spare guns that it never becomes a big deal if you lose an upgrade. Most arenas are littered with gun cases, enemies frequently drop weapons, and healing down marines will have them drop random weapons. It's pretty easy to regain any upgrades you've lost, especially considering you don't even lose a full upgrade when you die. The loss of upgrades is something I've seen criticized, and I can understand it and don't know that it's a mechanic that needed to be included, but it's not really a huge issue. What does matter, however, are the habits that this upgrade system enforce on the player. By having the player stack upgrades onto the weapons they're currently holding, the most solid strategy is just to hold on to whatever weapons you already have and never give them up. On top of that, you can't even use the weapon you want to use, because it needs to be full ammo in order to be upgraded by spare guns. There's a lot of cool weapons lying around during and after every single encounter, but unless you plan on starting all your upgrades over from scratch, there's no good reason to carry them with you after a fight. On occasion, I pick up a rocket launcher or an anti-armor pistol for situational uses, but I always swap back to my old weapon once I can. The anti-armor pistol and laser cannon in particular are so rare since they don't drop from enemies as far as I can tell, and can only be gotten from boxes or pre-placed caches, that there's no practical way to upgrade them other than using every single upgrade part you find on them. On my first playthrough on the PC port, I stuck with the weapons the game starts you with, the assault rifle, heavy machine gun, and shotgun, because they were the most common weapons and therefore the easiest to upgrade. And since they were easy to upgrade, I became invested in them, and didn't have an opportunity to use the more interesting weapons. It's a vicious cycle that the game encourages right from the outset. I did eventually swap out the shotgun for a sniper rifle, but it took so long for the sniper rifle to catch up that it wasn't fully upgraded until almost the end of the game when its usefulness was down significantly. It's a serious detriment to a game designed for multiple replays and based around flashiness that the best strategy is just to stick with the same stock weapons you've seen in 1,000 other games. The only real remedy for this, and it's not a very good remedy at all, is after every single fight to do a sort of weapon cleanup where you run around, stack all the weapons on top of each other, and get them all upgraded as much as they can, and then just go grab your regular guns again. You can either ignore this and sentence yourself to never using any of the cool weapons, or you can do it after every fight, like I do, and to waste a bunch of time being bored upgrading weapons that you're very rarely going to use. I really don't understand how this system got through without any changes or improvements to it. As mentioned earlier, the boost and slow-mo mechanics make up for some of the shortcomings of the weapons, but this is just missed potential. To make an ungracious segue, the game's action movie structure does cause some problems for the game despite my praise for how it structures the game. Vanquish can be overly generous with cutscenes. Platinum's flair for over-the-top cutscenes is present here, but a good few of the cutscenes are just boring and go on for too long. I really have no desire to ever watch this game's cutscenes again, not even the flashy ones, because a lot of what happens in those flashy cutscenes is stuff I'd rather be doing myself, even if it's just a QuickTime event. Say what you will about Bayonetta's cutscenes, but Bayonetta's cutscenes had character. Bayonetta's cutscenes were a lot flashier and had a lot more personality to them. Speaking of QuickTime events, the game has them. Not many, thankfully, and they're not intrusive. I wouldn't say they're wholly necessary, but they're cool enough and don't take too long, so it's no big deal. There's also no bullshit instant death QuickTimes like there are in Bayonetta. The ones here are pretty generous. I don't have much more to say about them. I'd rather be playing the game normally than doing a QuickTime event, but it's no big deal. Another small annoyance is the game's forced walking sections. I've got a lot of disdain for forced walking in games. It's a modern trend that I hope dies a horrible death very soon. But for all that, the walking sections here aren't too bad. They're usually short and used to give the player a breather in between big set pieces. Again, I'd rather they not be in the game at all, and the fact that they're unskippable unlike the cutscenes is a pain in the ass, but they're not a deal breaker. There are a lot of games with much worse forced walking than this one. With the complaining out of the way, I'd highly recommend Vanquish. It's a short experience, but a highly focused and fast-paced one. If you're a staunch anti-multiple playthrough sort of person, then I'd be wary, but for $20, Vanquish is a steal. It's one of the few genuinely great cover shooters, so even people who aren't into cover shooters can find something to enjoy in it. And of course, if you love flashy action games and perfecting your skills, this should be right up your alley. This is the definitive version of Vanquish, only 1 month after the definitive version of Bayonetta, and 2 months after the PC version of Nier Automata. Throw Platinum $20 and support their new PC porting policy.
This is starting to sound like a bad video game.